Welcome to Conversations for a Better You. Subscribe, like, and hit the bell to stay inspired and keep growing with us.
Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today, we're going to be tackling something that I think probably everyone listening can relate to, at least to some degree, fear.
Yeah, definitely.
And we're going to be looking at it from the perspective of Lama Rinchen Gyaltsen.
Yeah.
Now, he is a really, really fascinating teacher in the Saki Buddhist tradition. He's led a pretty amazing life.
Yeah.
He became an abbot in Bodh Gaya in India.
Wow.
And leads like this huge community of study groups. But what I find so interesting is his perspective on fear.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, because he doesn't just talk about like the big obvious fears, the kind of fears that might make you avoid like heights or spiders or something.
Right.
He talks about fear as this spectrum.
Okay.
Ranging from really intense fear down to these really subtle anxieties that kind of like are always there, buzzing beneath the surface.
So it's almost like he's saying that fear is like an iceberg.
Exactly.
Right.
You see the tip, the panic attacks, the phobias.
Right.
But there's this huge mass that's lurking beneath the water.
Right.
And that's where things get really interesting because, Lama Rinchen Gyaltsen points out that we often carry around all this kind of low-level anxiety without even realizing it, fear of losing our stuff, fear of discomfort, fear of not being liked, or even this fear of being ignored.
Ooh, that one hit a little close to home for me.
Yeah.
It's funny because, we don't usually think about those kind of like everyday anxieties as like fear, but I can totally see how that need for approval, for attention, it definitely comes from a place of anxiety. Have you noticed that in your own life?
Oh, absolutely.
Where maybe some of those subtler fears are kind of shaping your decisions?
Yeah, I think, for a lot of us, it's that fear of not being enough, successful enough, thin enough, whatever the standard is. Sure.
And this is where I think Lama Rinchen Gyaltsen gets really insightful.
Okay.
He says that all of these fears, big or small, really stem from attachment.
Okay, but attachment to what?
To anything, really.
Okay.
Material possessions, for sure, but it goes deeper than that.
Okay.
It's also attachment to ideas, to beliefs, to our opinions, even to our own carefully crafted image of ourselves.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, it's like the more we cling to something, the more afraid we are of losing it.
Yeah, that's the core idea.
Okay.
And that fear of loss, it can really drive our behavior in ways that we might not even recognize.
Yeah, for sure.
Think about it. How many of our choices are made out of a desire to hold on to something or someone?
Right.
Or to keep things exactly the way they are.
Right.
That's attachment fueling the engine of fear.
Man, that is seriously mind-blowing.
Yeah.
So if attachment is at the root of so much fear, what are we supposed to do about it?
Right.
Like, do we have to become these detached, emotionless beings? Well, that's a really common misconception, actually.
Okay.
Lama Rinchen Gyaltsen isn't advocating for some kind of cold, emotionless existence. What he's offering is something much more practical and I think, honestly, more hopeful.
Okay.
He talks about cultivating antidotes to fear, like building up our inner resilience so we can face those anxieties head on.
Antidotes. I love that.
Yeah.
What kind of antidotes are we talking about?
Well, he breaks it down into three main areas.
Okay.
Cultivating virtue, cultivating mental balance,
Okay.
and cultivating altruism.
Okay.
And trust me, these aren't as lofty or as abstract as they might sound.
Okay.
They're actually really grounded practices.
All right. I'm hooked. Let's start with virtue.
Okay.
What does that even look like in daily life?
So Lama Rinchen Gyaltsen really emphasizes the power of generosity as a direct counter to fear.
Okay.
Think about it. When we're gripped by that fear of lack, that scarcity mindset, what's the opposite of that?
Abundance.
Abundance, exactly.
Yeah.
And what's a really tangible way to create a sense of abundance, both within ourselves and in the world around us?
Giving,
being generous.
Yeah. So it's not just about like giving away all your money.
No, not at all.
Okay.
It's about shifting that internal state from I don't have enough to there's plenty to go around and I have something to offer.
Right.
And that generosity can take so many forms, sharing our time, our knowledge, a kind word, even just a genuine smile, When we give freely, it chips away at that fear of losing because we start to realize that we have this capacity to create and to share.
Yeah.
And that's incredibly empowering.
That's a pretty profound shift in perspective. I can definitely see how that would start to loosen fear's grip a little bit.
Yeah.
But what about like those moments when our mind is just racing, spinning out with anxieties about the future?
Yeah.
That's where I really struggle.
Sure.
What is this cultivating mental balance all about?
Well, it's about training your mind to be more resilient to the ups and downs.
Yeah.
Like building those mental muscles.
Yeah.
So we don't get swept away by every anxious thought that comes along.
Right.
Lama Rinchen Gyaltsen says it's about cultivating both tranquility and lucidity.
Okay. Tranquility makes sense to me, like, finding a sense of peace and calm. But what about lucidity?
So lucidity is basically about cultivating a clear, focused mind.
Okay.
It's that ability to see things as they are without all the mental fog and distortion that fear can create.
Gotcha.
And it's really cool.
Right.
A lot of the practices he suggests for developing both tranquility and lucidity are really practical and accessible.
Okay.
Even if you've never meditated a day in your life.
Okay, now you have to spill the beans. What are these magical practices?
All right. So one of the most powerful tools is simply being present.
Okay.
When we're caught up in those fear-fueled stories about the future, what we're doing is we're disconnecting from the present moment. We're living in our heads and not in our bodies and not in the world around us.
And that just fuels the anxiety.
Exactly. It's like a runaway train of what-ifs.
Totally.
So Lama Rinchen Gyaltsen encourages us to connect with our physical senses, to really feel our bodies, our breath, the sensations of the world around us. Have you ever noticed how simply feeling your feet on the ground or the coolness of the air on your skin can bring you back to the present moment?
It's amazing how grounding those little things can be.
Yeah.
I'm starting to see how these practices can really help us to create a sense of inner stability, even when everything around us feels really chaotic and uncertain.
That's the key.
Yeah.
It's not about eliminating fear altogether.
Right.
It's about learning to navigate it more skillfully.
Yeah.
To create a sense of inner spaciousness.
Okay.
So we're not constantly reacting from that place of fear.
This is all making so much sense.
Good.
Okay, so last but not least, what about this idea of cultivating altruism? I'm a little fuzzy on how helping others ties into conquering fear.
Yeah, it might seem a little counterintuitive.
Right.
But it's incredibly powerful. Think about those times when you're spiraling into fear. What's your focus?
Honestly, it's usually all about me and my problems.
Right.
Which probably isn't helping.
Exactly. Fear tends to make us contract.
Yeah.
To turn inward. To focus on our own perceived threats. But Lama Rinchen Gyaltsen points out that when we shift our attention outward, when we focus on the needs of others, something really interesting happens.
So it's like taking a break from our own inner drama and connecting with something bigger than ourselves.
Yes, exactly. He says that even small acts of kindness can help us to feel less overwhelmed by our own anxieties.
Okay.
It might be helping a neighbor carry groceries, offering a listening ear to a friend, or even just volunteering our time for a cause we care about. And there's something beautifully paradoxical about it.
What's out?
When we focus on easing the suffering of others, we often find that our own suffering diminishes as well.
It's like we're reminding ourselves that we're not alone, that we're part of something larger.
Yeah.
And that we have this capacity to make a positive impact on the world.
That's a great way to put it. And that brings us to, I think, the most profound part of Lama Rinchen Gyaltsen's teachings.
Okay.
Which we'll dive into in part 2.
Right.
This idea that to truly dismantle fear,
we
need to embrace the true nature of reality itself.
Okay. Now I'm really intrigued.
Yeah.
What does he mean by embracing reality?
So he points to 2 key aspects of reality. That when truly understood can completely shift our perspective. Impermanence and interdependence.
All right. I am so ready for part 2.
Stay tuned, because this is where things get really interesting.
All right. So last time we were getting into some pretty deep stuff about fear with Lama Rinchen Gyaltsen.
Yeah.
We talked about how attachment is at the root of so much of our anxiety and how cultivating things like generosity and mindfulness can really help us to build up these inner antidotes to fear.
Right. And we left off on this cliffhanger about embracing the true nature of reality.
Yeah.
Which sounds very profound.
It does. It does. I'm ready to dive into that.
Oh.
You mentioned impermanence and interdependence.
Yeah.
Where do we even begin with those concepts?
Well, Lama Rinchen Gyaltsen emphasizes that these aren't just these abstract philosophical ideas.
Right.
They're fundamental truths about the way things actually are.
Okay.
And when we really grasp them, they can have this radical impact on how we experience fear.
Okay, so let's start with impermanence.
Okay.
I think I get the basic idea. Everything changes, nothing stays the same forever. But how does that help us deal with fear?
Well, think about it this way. A lot of our fears come from this desire to hold on to things,
right.
to keep them from changing, to maintain some sense of control over our lives.
Yeah.
But what if that's an impossible task?
Because change is inevitable.
Exactly. Change is the only constant.
Yeah.
It's woven into the very fabric of existence. And when we resist that truth, we're setting ourselves up for a whole lot of suffering.
Yeah.
And to illustrate this point, Lama Rinchen Gyaltsen uses this wonderful analogy of a tomato seed.
Okay, I love a good analogy.
Yeah.
Tell me about this tomato seed.
So he talks about how the seed contains the potential for the entire plant. It sprouts, it grows, it produces fruit.
Yeah.
And those fruits produce new seeds, continuing the cycle.
Right.
There's this constant transformation, this flow of arising and dissolving.
Yeah.
But we tend to get so fixated on specific points in that cycle.
Okay.
Clinging to the fruit, lamenting the withered plant.
Right.
Fearing the end.
But there is no real ending.
Exactly. It's just part of a continuous process of change.
Right.
And he points out that this applies to our own lives as well.
Okay.
We're not these static beings.
Right.
We're constantly changing physically, mentally, emotionally. Every experience we have, every thought, every emotion, it's all part of this flow.
Yeah. I'm starting to see how this relates to fear.
Okay.
If we're constantly trying to hold on to a fixed idea of ourselves, of our lives, we're going to be in this constant state of anxiety.
Right.
Because that's just not how reality works.
It's like trying to hold on to water,
Yeah.
The tighter you grip it, the more it slips through your fingers.
Right.
So what if instead of fearing change, we learn to embrace it?
Okay.
To see it as an opportunity for growth, for renewal, for discovering new possibilities.
That is a very different way of looking at things. I'm definitely someone who struggles with a fear of the unknown. Of things being different from how I want them to be.
Sure.
It's almost like I'm afraid of losing control.
And that's where this understanding of impermanence can be so liberating.
Okay.
Because it reminds us that we never really had control in the first place.
Okay.
We can make plans. We can set intentions. But ultimately, life unfolds in its own way.
Right.
And the more we can surrender to that flow, the less we're going to be gripped by that fear of losing control.
So it's not about becoming passive, but it's about recognizing that there's this natural order to things and that trying to rigidly control every aspect of our lives is just going to create more stress and anxiety.
That's the essence of it.
Okay.
And it's really interesting. This understanding of impermanence actually lays the groundwork for embracing the second key aspect of reality.
Okay.
Interdependence.
Okay. I'm all ears. How do those two concepts connect?
Well, if we accept that everything is in constant flux, that nothing stays the same, then it naturally follows that nothing exists in isolation.
Because everything is impacting everything else all the time.
Exactly. Everything is interconnected, influencing and being influenced by everything around it.
Okay.
And Lama Rinchen Gyaltsen uses this incredibly powerful image of a single grain of rice to illustrate this point.
Wait, a grain of rice?
Yeah.
That's an interesting choice. What's so special about a grain of rice?
He says that if you really look at that single grain of rice, you see that it contains the contributions of the entire universe.
Wow.
The sun that provided the energy for the plant to grow.
Right.
The rain that nourished the soil. The farmer who planted and harvested the rice. The people who transported it.
I never thought about it like that.
Yeah.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you realize how much goes into even the simplest things. It's like that grain of rice represents this intricate web of connections that we're all part of.
Exactly. And that realization can be profoundly comforting, especially when we're dealing with fear.
Okay.
Because it reminds us that we're not alone in this.
Right.
We're supported by this vast network of causes and conditions, even when we don't realize it.
I'm starting to see how this ties back to the idea of attachment.
Okay.
If we're clinging to this illusion of separateness, of being these isolated individuals who have to figure everything out on our own, it's no wonder we feel so afraid.
Yeah.
But when we start to see the interconnectedness of everything, it's like a huge weight lifts off our shoulders.
It's like we're tapping into this deeper source of strength and resilience.
Yeah.
And Lama Rinchen Gyaltsen emphasizes that this understanding of interdependence can be a really powerful antidote to the fear of loss.
Okay.
Because when we realize that everything is connected, that nothing truly disappears,
Right.
it shifts our perspective on what it means to lose something.
Yeah, I'm really feeling the shift in perspective. It's like instead of feeling isolated and vulnerable, we're recognizing that we're part of something so much larger than ourselves.
Yeah.
And that sense of belonging, of connection, it feels incredibly empowering.
That's the heart of it. But you know what's even more fascinating?
What?
This understanding of interdependence actually goes hand in hand with cultivating those other antidotes to fear that we talked about earlier.
Oh, interesting.
Generosity, mindfulness, and compassion.
Okay, how?
Well, think about it. When we recognize that we're all interconnected, it naturally makes us more generous because we understand that our well-being is tied to the well-being of others.
It's like that sense of we're all in this together.
Yeah.
That can inspire us to reach out and help others, to share our resources and support each other.
Exactly. And when we understand that everything is constantly changing, it makes us more mindful because we're more present to each moment as it arises and dissolves.
Right.
We're less likely to get caught up in those rigid fear-based stories about the past or the future.
Okay.
And I can see how this understanding of interdependence can also make us more compassionate.
Yeah.
Because when we see ourselves as part of this larger web of life, it's easier to extend that kindness and understanding to others, even those who might seem different from us.
Right. It's all interconnected.
It's all interconnected. And these qualities of generosity, mindfulness, and compassion, they're not just things that we cultivate in isolation. They arise naturally from this deeper understanding of impermanence and interdependence.
Wow, this is all coming together in such a beautiful way. It's like Lama Rinchen Gyaltsen is offering us this roadmap for navigating fear, for transforming it into something that can actually make us stronger and more connected.
That's a great way to put it. And in part 3, we'll explore how these teachings can help us not only manage fear, but actually cultivate a deeper sense of peace and courage in our lives.
Welcome back to our deep dive on conquering fear with Lama Khenpo Rinchen Gyaltsen.
Yeah.
So we've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
You know, we talked about how to recognize those sort of sneaky everyday anxieties and how attachment really fuels that fear fire. And we ended on this really powerful note about how embracing the true nature of reality, specifically impermanence and interdependence, can be kind of this ultimate antidote to fear.
It's true.
I gotta say, I'm feeling a lot less intimidated by this idea of conquering fear.
Yeah.
It's starting to feel less like this battle and more like a journey of understanding and acceptance.
That's a great way to put it.
So how do we actually do that?
Yeah.
How do we move from understanding these concepts of impermanence and interdependence to actually living them, to making them a part of our daily experience?
It's not about suddenly achieving some kind of perfect enlightenment.
Right.
It's really about incorporating these small shifts in our thinking and our behavior.
Okay.
And gradually aligning ourselves with these truths.
Can you give me some concrete examples?
Sure.
I'm all about practical application.
Absolutely. So think about a time when you were really stressed out about something.
Okay.
Maybe a work deadline, a conflict with a loved one, anything that really triggered that fear response.
Well, just last week, my computer crashed.
Oh, no.
And I lost a bunch of important files, and I totally freaked out.
Yeah.
It felt like the end of the world.
I get it.
Yeah.
So in that moment, you were probably hyper-focused on the situation.
Yeah.
On the perceived loss, on all the negative what-ifs.
Totally.
But what if you could pause?
Yeah.
Take a breath and remind yourself of impermanence.
So instead of panicking about the lost files, I could tell myself, this situation is temporary, it's going to change.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that doesn't minimize the challenge.
Right.
It simply helps you create some space between yourself and the fear so you can respond more skillfully.
So I might take some practical steps to recover the files, reach out for help, or maybe even realize that those files weren't as crucial as I initially thought.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're not getting swept away by the fear. You're recognizing it, acknowledging it, and then choosing how to respond.
It's like fear is this wave that's about to crash over me, but instead of getting knocked down, I'm learning to ride it out.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
So what about interdependence? How can we apply that in these everyday moments of fear?
This one feels a little trickier.
Remember that grain of rice? It reminds us that we're not isolated.
Right.
That we're supported by all these countless causes and conditions. So in that moment of stress, instead of feeling alone and overwhelmed,
Yeah.
you could ask yourself, who or what can I reach out to for support?
Okay, so instead of isolating myself with my fear, I could connect with a friend,
Yeah.
ask for advice, or maybe even just vent and feel heard.
That's it. You're tapping into that web of interdependence.
Okay.
Recognizing that you're not alone in this.
Yeah.
And here's another powerful application of interdependence.
Okay.
What if instead of focusing solely on your own stress, you shift your attention to someone else who might be struggling?
You're talking about that altruism piece again.
Exactly. Sometimes the best way to get out of our own heads is to focus on helping others.
Right.
It might be something as simple as offering a kind word to a stranger, doing a chore for a family member, or donating to a cause you care about.
It's amazing how shifting our focus outward can just totally shift our perspective.
It's like we're saying, yes, this situation is challenging, but I have the capacity to offer kindness and support to others.
Right.
And that act of giving it creates a sense of connection, of purpose that can be so powerful in the face of fear.
This is all starting to feel a lot less overwhelming and a lot more empowering.
That's what we want.
Yeah. That's like Lama Rinchen Gyaltsen is saying, fear is a part of life. It's not going away, but we have a choice in how we relate to it.
That's a beautiful way to sum it up. You know, he's not offering some magical formula for erasing fear.
Right.
He's giving us these really practical tools for transforming it, for using it as an opportunity for growth and deeper understanding.
So it's less about conquering fear and more about befriending it.
Yeah.
Maybe even learning from it.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that fear, like everything else, is impermanent.
Right.
It arises, it lingers, and it eventually fades away. And the more we can hold it lightly with a sense of awareness and compassion, the less power it has over us.
This has been such a transformative deep dive.
Yeah, it's been great.
I feel like I have this whole new toolkit for navigating those inevitable moments of fear.
I'm glad.
What's the key takeaway that you hope our listeners will walk away with?
Well, I think Lama Rinchen Gyaltsen leaves us with this really thought-provoking question.
Okay.
He asks, if fear arises from the illusion of separateness, how can deepening our understanding of interdependence help us move towards greater fearlessness?
Wow, that is a powerful question.
It is.
It really challenges us to shift our whole perspective on fear, on ourselves, and on our place in the world.
Absolutely.
And maybe, just maybe, as we cultivate that deeper understanding of connection, of impermanence, of the ever-changing nature of reality, we can start to embrace life with a little more courage, a little more kindness, and a lot less fear.
Beautifully said.
This has been a truly inspiring journey. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into conquering fear.
It's been my pleasure.
We hope these insights will serve you well on your own path towards greater peace and well-being.
Thanks for joining us on Conversations for a Better You. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more content to help you grow. See you next time.